The reason we're talking about textual criticism and the Bible is to do with a number of facts, shall we say. The first is that the original manuscripts of the books of the Bible are no longer extant. They have disappeared into the sands of history. They are no more. And that's perfectly reasonable. That is what happens with ancient works written on papyrus and animal skin. They have a certain amount of shelf life, and eventually they will degrade and fall apart. The second thing is that we have many copies that survive of the biblical books. So we have many thousands of copies of the various books of the Old and New Testament. There are differences between the various copies that we have. So there are omissions, additions, mistakes, etc. Again, something perfectly normal when we're dealing with ancient history, when texts are written and copied over hundreds of years, over millennia, we see these kinds of mistakes come into any transmission of a text. And traditionally, the aim of textual criticism is to produce the most accurate Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek text from the surviving manuscripts that best reflects the original text. So that's what this whole discipline is about. It's about looking at the evidence, and it's about assessing where the evidence takes us, and at the end of the day, producing a text that translators can use then, or scholars can use in their study of the Bible to get back as close as we can to the original. So that is what this whole discipline is all about. So when we talk about the biblical text, what are some of the fragments that survive? Well, one of the oldest that we have is a little tiny silver amulet, okay? And it's called the Ketef Hinnom scroll. And this was a personal object by a Jewish man or woman, and it contains a portion of the Deerpark Hinnom, the Aaronic priestly blessing from Numbers, you know, that beautiful prayer, and there's also a little verse from Deuteronomy. Doesn't really give us a lot of biblical text, not a lot you can do with it, and the text itself isn't a scholarly production. This is a tiny silver amulet that someone would have kept for personal use, but evidence like this is important in its own way. And one of the amazing things about this little fragment is that it contains a verse from a book called Numbers. And in the 19th century, the prevailing consensus among some scholars was that Moses didn't write the Pentateuch, and they developed a whole system of theorizing how the books that we call the Pentateuch came into being through different redactions and different authors, and they postulated that the book of Numbers is after the Babylonian exile, and it was one of the, the later portions of what we would call the Pentateuch. But here, in this tiny little fragment that was found in Jerusalem, is a personal amulet. So this already reflects the widespread use of this text, okay? The fact that it's already been written down as a memento shows that it is widespread and recognized in the Jewish community, and it dates from before the exile. So that tiny scrap of silver more or less demolishes the documentary hypothesis. So even when we come across fragments, as we will in this study, sometimes the fragments can tell us an awful lot. It may not be that we have a lot of text here, but it's clearly from the priestly blessing from Numbers. But what it does show is that the Old Testament predates the Babylonian exile, and so theories about this later development of the Pentateuch really, they don't do justice to the evidence as we have it. So